Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Anxious Lad podcast. And joining me in the virtual studio tonight is ex Exeter Chiefs and England international rugby player Tom Johnson. Tom, how you doing, buddy?
Hello, Matt. Nice to be here, mate. Thank you very much for having me into your virtual studio. Look forward to
No.
having a chat, mate. But things are all right, thank you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to have you, buddy. Absolute pleasure. And look, I think the big one I want to talk to you tonight is about the new company, right? Plus, and plus the digital wellbeing software for primary school kids. You and I have obviously had a chat about it. Obviously, before the conversation, I've seen the stuff you're doing on LinkedIn and everything. So it's I'm really looking forward to obviously you getting the word out there about the software and what it does, but also to hear your story about kind of where it came from and your, I guess, experience with mental health growing up and stuff as well.
Yeah, it's become a bit of a passion project of mine at the moment, where
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the really underserved areas in life is sort of primary schools and how underestimated they are for the roles they play in our future sort of attainment and our future prospects and happiness and all that goes into sort of our well-being and life in general. And I think it's a vital part of our development as individuals. And the more it's when you look under the rock of it, you start to see how much more support these teachers need, and what an amazing job they're
Mm-hmm.
doing, and how can we give them that support, because they're the ones who are really in control, or they have a huge impact on the outlook of all the kids that come through their schools and go through their classrooms. And you look at some of the Scandinavian companies, they're doing a fantastic job, and I just think
Mm-hmm.
our primary schools need a lot more support, because they're getting pressured every left, right, and centre, and at some point there's going to be a break.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it is it's interesting, like, because like on the one, like both my older two kids both went to school in London, so they both went through the UK primary school system, and then one of them finished her A levels, the other lad finished just before his GCSEs before we moved back to Ireland. So, but from a primary school perspective, I know exactly what you mean. It tends to be kind of the usual story, overcrowded and underfunded almost, you know. And
It
as you
is.
say, like these teachers are on, yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
like these teachers are on the front line with the kids. They see them every day, but I guess because they're so, you know, if you've one teacher, you may have a teaching assistant or whatever in the class with you, but there's not enough time in the day, I don't think, for the teachers to really sit with every single child individually. So naturally, as a result of that, some kids are going to fall through the cracks, aren't they?
100%, and they're what they've got to deliver on, and part of the Ofsted sort of framework is being able to
Mm,
deliver personal people development. It's like, how are they meant to? The average class size is twenty
yeah,
six students, and like you said, sometimes they're lucky enough to have
yeah,
a TA, and other times they're not, and they're also meant to hit all these academic performances and goals, and you wonder why they're having children sort of thrown at them at the gate that are underslept, under dehydrated, fed
mm-hmm,
fed a load of sort of cereals, high on sugar as they come in the gates, and they're being asked to deal with their mental health. And because kids can't attain unless they're in a safe place to be able to learn, and they're in a place
yeah,
neurologically
yeah,
where they can learn. And if they haven't got that, then the teacher's first point of call is to try and put them in a position where they can actually teach them, which then detracts from other people. So, but I'm quite optimistic with the technology and the development in technology that's out there. Is that the way to support these teachers is through tech, and is through sort of machine
mm-hmm,
learning, and getting these children to self regulate and self care themselves, because that's what they'll need to do when they step out into secondary school and further into university or
absolutely.
college, or into work life, whatever that is. You've been there, I've been there. We've got to. It's on us to deal with it, not anyone else, and that's what we need to be. That's what we need to be helping these teachers coach the kids to be able to do, is to be able to self care and self manage.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about Plus then, like where it came from, the idea behind it. Why is it such a passion for you? Like, how did you end up
Well,
getting
I
into this
started off.
line of work?
It's quite. Well, I think it's quite an interesting story. When I finished playing rugby, I went into coaching, and so I've always been looking at like the perfect scenario in which to coach someone. I was coaching adults, business people, mums, and you know
Mm-hmm.
anywhere from the age of sort of 30 on up to sort of 55, 60. And one thing is they all had like some ingrained habits that were really really hard to break down. So I spent a like, huge amount of time before my coaching career trying to break these habits down and rebuild them, and trying to get them to journal, and trying to take accountability for their own actions, so that we can start to change it, start to put in some healthier habits. And it got to the point
Yeah.
where I've always had this sort of buzzing around in my back of my head. And I was thinking, well, actually, the perfect environment, what's the environment where people are made to sit still and told to do exactly as they're made to do exactly as they're told, and it's primary schools. And I was like, well, actually, I researched into it a little bit, and actually, that's when children, or that's when people have habits ingrained into them at the youngest,
Mm-hmm.
at the easiest time. That's when habits are so easy to uptake, when you're between the ages of 6 and 14. So I went on down that road, and then it became quite apparent that actually why I'm doing this is because of the. So I suffered quite severe childhood trauma when I was at secondary school, and the reason, and I turned to exercise because of what I went through when I was at primary school with my granddad in particular. He was a massive influencer on me, and so
All right.
it really highlighted to me the importance of getting good habits into children at a young age, because you never know when they're going to be needed. So
Mm-hmm.
I sort of came at it from two angles. The second one was a bit of subconsciously, and then the first one was through my coaching. And then since I've been gone further and further into it, it's become really apparent that what I went through in that secondary school had a huge impact on my rugby, but my family life, where I am now, has all been down to sort of that trauma that I faced when I was at secondary school. And without the influence of my granddad when I was during the primary years, I could have gone in all kinds of directions.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, you and I kind of spoke about that before, I guess, and you always speak very highly of your granddad and the influence he had on your fitness. And as you kind of quite rightly said, you don't know when some of those habits or some of those things are going to come back to help you later on in life, and for you certainly, and hopefully we get into it in a minute anyway. But from the trauma and the stuff that you experienced in secondary school, it really was the physical fitness and that mentality that your granddad installed into you, that's what kind of got you through all of it, really, wasn't it?
It was, but it was by pure. It was a subconscious decision. It was a completely subconscious decision. I didn't think to myself, how am I going to get myself out of this? I just reverted back to type. And my type was, when I was younger,
Mm-hmm.
it was like being around my brothers, being around my granddad, like going for runs, playing around in the garden, kicking the ball around, doing press ups and pull ups. And like he was massively into his fitness. So he was always hanging upside down on a bar, doing pull ups, um, doing crazy upside down hang up sit ups and all kinds of stuff. He was like 8 years old doing it and having cold baths and eating like impeccably. Just like he just you, we thought he was a bit crazy. We're like, what's old crazy granddad up to? But he was obviously, he's having cold baths. This was back in like I don't know, 1992, 1991, and he was doing cold baths
Yeah.
and he's going for like 5 mile runs daily, and he was like 83 years old or something, and it's just like crazy. And
Wow.
then when the trauma started and the bullying started and the physical abuse started, I just started training, and I hadn't trained for sort of 3 or 4 years, like properly press ups and sit ups and that kind of stuff. And I just got myself into a real regime of just trying to. I found it as a massive stress reliever, but also found myself getting strong enough to be able to defend myself.
And if we can touch on that then a little bit, then, right, the I guess the bullying side of it that you experienced then in secondary school. Um, Does your experience in that, do you think, have an influence in how this digital wellbeing software works within the primary school set? Like if you had a had, if the teacher saying the secondary school you went to had something like that in place, do you think it would have lasted as long as it did, or would have lasted at all? Or
I think one thing that I realised that I wasn't able to do as a child was to be able to communicate how I was feeling and what
mm,
was going on. Um, and that's one of the biggest. That's one of the big sort of features in the Plus platform is we ask children and teachers. It's done in the settling in period, so every child every day checks in on their well-being before they start the day, and it's quite important.
okay,
It's quite important. It's almost like an important ritual or an important habit. Going, I need to check that my well-being is okay, or I want to self-reflect what I did yesterday, because that reflection gives them a chance to recognize whether something was good, something was bad, something was off, and they can make changes to that today rather than wait until it starts to slowly drop off, and that's where you tend to get the big issues.
mm-hmm.
We put in there like a communication tool that allows the teacher to see if there's any issues and any safeguarding issues in particular, and it makes communication for a young kid a normal everyday part of life rather than when I was at school. Everyone said, and I'm sure you were the same, going, "Oh, if you got any problems, tell a teacher." There's no way on earth we're telling teachers. It wasn't
No,
a done thing.
no,
It was the old
no,
snitches get stitches, and it still is a little bit today.
yeah,
And actually,
yeah,
what we need to try and do is talk the language of the kids that are spending more and more time on their phones and digital devices to actually go, well, actually, if that's how they communicate and that's how they feel comfortable, let's listen to them and let's arm those teachers with a way that the teachers can hear them loud and clearly without taking any extra time. And if in fact it's almost like a reductionist approach where you're giving these teachers some key information so they can use their invaluable time in the right areas rather than it all being sort of wherever they feel they might need to go, whereas this is sort of direction and where to go. And that's what I didn't have
yeah,
when I was 13. Well, from 13 through to 18, I had no one to talk to about it, and that was probably. I felt that it was all on my shoulders, and I had to sort it.
mm-hmm. And and I guess for your experience, right, it would be somewhat different, let's say, to mine. Right now, like I said, we've spoken about this before. I didn't go through what you went through in school in terms of bullying and stuff, right? But if we kind of take that in a comparison to today's world,
Mm,
but again, yours would be somewhat different to a degree because you're in a boarding school, right? So yours always it was 24/7 for you at that point, which is to a certain degree kind of what it's like for the kids nowadays. Because like when I was in school, if anyone was getting bullied or you were getting shit off somebody in school, it was left in school at 3:30 because you went home and there's no way of contacting you, there's no way of being able to see you. Like very rarely would you see somebody out on the street. It only happened during school hours. Whereas now, I think with society today, because of the mobile devices, Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, all of it, there's it's 24/7. The bullying is constant, and it's even worse now um because of the technology and stuff that was there. And to a similar degree, that was kind of like what it would have been for you because it was in a boarding school. You'd had no escape from it, I guess.
very, we're complete worlds apart in terms of what was that 30 years ago or so I was there.
Mm,
um, but so relevant in today's world. Like as you said,
yeah.
there's a kid a couple of months ago that got he's in secondary school, he's year seven, so secondary school, and he got a WhatsApp. He's on a year group WhatsApp, and one of the lads put on there going, thumbs down if you don't like Mike, right? And he woke up in the morning at like 6 o'clock and he had like 72 thumbs down or whatever it was out of a year group of like 80. And it's like, what is that doing for that kid? Like, yeah, some people may be able to laugh it off, and some people are doing it, but to be walking into
Mm,
school knowing that you got lessons with these guys, and everyone in that classroom and everyone in that year group said, "I don't like you. you're a thumbs down, you're a rotten fella. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much for that person to just to start that spiral and start that snowball effect.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
where's the point where someone's going to be able to bring him back? He becomes more and more insular, starts to search more and more online, and depending on what depending on that kid's back upbringing, like, has he got the support around him to be able to deal with that? Potentially, but potentially not. And I was lucky.
Mm,
I was lucky, and I had blessed myself with who I had bringing me up. Um, but that could have been drugs, alcohol, self harm, whatever for me. And that's what these kids are facing now. In terms of what I went
yeah.
through, mine was 24/7. It was I remember just the anxiety of it wasn't online obviously, but being in a boarding house, I was
Hmm.
I was able to be got at 24/7. It was anxious
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
bed. It was anxious walking into a TV room. I was sat in watching a TV room, and if they'd walk in, my anxiety would spike up. I'd go into any classroom, whatever, and if they were in there, then my anxiety was constant. I was constantly going, well, who do I have to sit next to at dinner or lunch or breakfast to make sure that I can sort of eat my meal in peace?
yeah. And that's the thing. Like it is. It's as you say. It's that constant contact that you had with it. That is, whilst from a technical standpoint, it is worlds apart from today. But again, it's so very relatable, I guess, to what that young lad is feeling. Do you know what I mean? Like when that young lad Mike, when he wakes up and to a certain degree, for a lot of, now I don't know obviously, but you kind of assume to a certain degree most of those thumbs down was a mob mentality almost. There's people
Mm.
there who's like, shit, I better put the thumbs down because they're going to think I like him and then I might get slagged if I like him and that kind of stuff. And a lot of people just jumping on the bandwagon, they're trying to seem cool or whatever. But the damage that even that one message is having to that kid waking up at that hour of the morning to see that. And then, as you said, the anxiety building going into school that day would just be incredible.
For me. It was that. It's that 24. It's that uncontrollable anxiety. It's that constant
Yeah.
uptick in sort of your cortisol, and you can never relax. And it puts you in a state. If you think about how important is sleep for your mental health, but not just for that, but
Mm,
also for your cognitive ability, for your actual ability to
yeah.
function as a human, to take in information, to learn, to develop, especially at that young age, it can have huge implications on your neural development. And I think I left school thinking I was thick as pig shit. To be honest with you, I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
all I wanted to do was get out of that school, and actually, I'm not as bad as I think. I'm not as bad as I thought I was. But having years and years and years of like no sleep and being completely controlled, it's no wonder. I look back at it now and I'm like, Christ, of course I can learn. It's the same for these kids. These kids are more interested about being liked or not being picked on than
Mm,
actually being able to concentrate in class. They're not in a happy place. So how can they? If unhappy kids don't learn.
yeah. 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 And that was the that was the big thing again. Like when we spoke the other day, that was, I think, one of the big, like, obviously, look, there was the verbal abuse, the physical abuse, the mental abuse that you got at the hands of these lads in school. But one of the big ones that you spoke about was the sleep deprivation element of it, because they could get at you 24/7. They could get at you at night time as well. So there was a like, for long periods of time there, you had no sleep or couldn't get to sleep, afraid to go to sleep, or they'd wake you up and it was broken sleep, and it was almost like, it wasn't almost like, it was torture to a degree. So
I've got images in my head when I was just asleep, like under my covers, just in like a sodden mattress, like the whole mattress is sunk. I don't know, when you get a load of water poured on a mattress, your mattress basically
mm,
collapses, and then you almost get to the stage where it's almost like you get to the stage where you warm the water back up so that you can actually get back to sleep. It's like you get in there and you get so tight around the blanket, or the duvet. Um, but it was just miserable, and there's like I just remember seeing the imprint the imprint of my body on the mattress, because obviously it had taken so much water. And I'd go to bed. I'd go to bed with a towel over me, so that if first port of call, I'd right. Well, I don't want my duvet to get wet, so I'll get my towel wet first. And it happened maybe 3 nights a week or so, and sometimes it'd just be a cup of water or whatever. But then there were times when there's like genuine buckets, and it was relentless. And then it becomes, it's not if, it's when, and it's that hanging over you constantly, where I used to dread going to sleep at night, and that in itself is keeps you up, keeps you like not doesn't let you have a decent night's sleep. And at the age of like I'm a July birthday, and these guys are sort of September, October birthday, so they're nearly a full they're nearly a full calendar year ahead of me. And there's no and the development when I was like 12, 13. So I went there on like what was called a sports scholarship. So I was a bit of a jack of all trades on the sports field, so I could apply my hand to most sports, and I loved it. And I was like, I'd be to probably top 2, 3, maybe fourth person in the team with it was. So I was in the top 20% of most of the sports teams. By the second year, I was in the B teams for all sports. And I just think, you look back for triggers and you look back for signs and communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm angry now that no one picked that up. I'm angry and disappointed that someone didn't go, well, what's going on with Tom? So, he came here on a sports scholarship, and all of a sudden he's playing B team in every sport. Whereas the year before, it was like almost top of the tree sort of sports team, A team, captains, that kind of stuff. It's as if someone had done that from an academic point of view and gone from set 1 down to set 4 or 5, whatever, their parents be getting called in. It's like, what's going on? It's just it's being able to communicate, and that's what it all comes back to, that communication.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And you're right. Like even today, like for me growing up in school, and definitely for you as well, you didn't have that that confidence, or even not even confidence, I guess, but even that. I'll go and tell the teacher that someone's picking on me, or I'll go and tell the teacher that I'm having problems. Like you just didn't. It wasn't.
It wasn't a habit. You're 100% right. It wasn't. It wasn't a habit. It wasn't like it didn't. I didn't even go, oh, I can't talk to someone. I didn't even contemplate. If someone said, "Is everything all right?" I was like, "Yeah, fine, thanks." Even like, I remember some of the older boys in the house going, "Look, is everything all right, Tom? You seem to be getting." I was like, "Yeah, no, they're just having fun." That kind of stuff. I was like, absolutely. It was like. Is almost an embarrassment, and you end up getting. It's a bit like that Stockholm syndrome, isn't it? You actually get closer, and you start to want to try and almost befriend the bullies, and like you want their gratification, and you want to sort of please them, and it's really like it's really perverse.
Yeah. And if you think back with it, like with the bullying and with obviously the trauma and everything you went through, because that was for years, right? So that's 24/7, 5 years of your life from 13 up to 18.
Yeah.
Now, on the one side, you can kind of say, from a simplistic view, right, and somebody who's never experienced it, you can kind of say, well, it must have got easier when you left school and went to uni, right? But that's only because the bullying stopped, but the mental scars are still there carrying through university. So like for you, right, and then going to play rugby in university, and then to go on to your professional career and stuff, how were you able to make that flip? Right, like obviously you didn't forget about it, right? Because you're not going to forget that kind of trauma. Like, but for you, like, what was the turning point, or was there ever a turning point where you kind of go, right, I'm okay now. The bullies aren't here anymore. It's a different school. It's a different set of friends.
So I went. My big thing was. So I was like called. One of the worst parts of the bullying was I could the physical and the sleep deprivation happened fine. It was actually the last couple of years they started calling me. So they started calling me the Rash, because I got bigger. Girls were a bit more sort of interested in me. I started to get myself back together because I've been training, and I started getting back in the sports team, and things. I thought I was coming through it, And then they nicknamed, because because girls started to take a bit of an interest and I was hanging out with different people. They thought I was hanging around other people, and they made it to be out like I was a rash, just hanging around them like a nasty itch. And that was, do you know what? As
Right.
in, like, they didn't want me around them. I was trying to be around them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah.
and it was, do you know, that word, it still sort of brings anxiety to me now, and like I feel my sort of heart race a little bit, because at any point, like they'd walk past me in the schoolyard or whatever, I'd be sat with a couple of friends, maybe a girl or whatever, and they go, "Well, why are you hanging out with the rash?" They'd look at me and they'd get up and they'd leave, and then suddenly I had like
Jesus.
I had all my identity taken away. So there's nothing I could do with it. It's a bit like
Yeah,
that. It's a bit like that herd mentality on the thumbs down on the WhatsApp.
yeah, yeah.
Do you know, there's some people, they've suddenly got an ability to not just to beat on me, but actually to control other opinions on me, and
Other opinions of it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
that was the worst thing for me. And then when I left and had like a clean sheet, when I went to sort of university, not a million miles away. I had a fresh start and I loved it, and I was like, people, I could be me. I
Mm-hmm.
was really, really worried about people. And there's one lad who joined. So I went to Oxford Brookes, and there's a lad, really nice guy, and he joined from 2 years below, like a year later, because I took a year out. And I had the best year, and then the second year, there's a guy that I knew from Dean Close who joined the sort of rugby team with me, and I know him well enough, and I was absolutely petrified that he was going to start calling me the rash and tell everyone that that's what I was called at school and that's what I needed to be called here.
Right.
I had so much like anxiety and concern over that,
Yeah,
because all of
yeah,
a sudden
absolutely.
I spent a whole year almost rebuilding myself, and for
Mm.
me that crushed everything again, and that I found that really hard I found that really, really hard to deal with. But then I realised, actually, so I started to sort of build my confidence. But I started training properly when I was at university, and it was always because I didn't want to be weak. And rather than training because I wanted to be good at something, I trained because I didn't want to be weak or set on. And it's a very different. It's not. It's a pretty poisonous way to approach like life. Rather than doing things because you want to do it, you're doing things because you don't want to be set on. I found that,
Yeah, yeah.
I've only really just unpacked that in the last like 3 or 4 years. It's like every time I was training, it's because I had like the bullies on my shoulder, and it was like me versus them constantly, and it gave me
Mm.
great, it gave me great resilience to be able to push through some pretty nasty training sessions, and built me physically strong, but mentally I was obviously broken, like mentally weak, to be able to have to train because of that rather than because I was worth it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like you see, I guess the other side to that coin, then, as you say, is the the way you threw yourself into the training. Because like we spoke of this as well. Like professional rugby wasn't even a thought for you
No,
at one point. Like you did, as you said, the physical training, building up and getting to the size and everything that you were to play as a forward, like was to obviously give you that view from the outside that, look, I'm a big bloke. You don't need to come at me. Do you know what I mean? I can defend myself. I can, and almost like a shield almost that you were putting up.
it was, and so I've done some work with a couple of people, and one guy described it really well. It's almost there's almost like three eyes in your life, and you got like little eye, medium eye, and a big eye. A big capital locked eye,
Right,
a normal standard eye, and then a little eye. And I kept flipping between. The
right,
little eye was when I was like small and being bullied and intimidated, and then the big eye. So I'd flip between the two eyes. I then build myself into this big protective eye, which isn't really
mm-hmm.
me, and that little eye isn't really me. And actually, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. And I found it very hard to be that person in the middle, right, that has that self worth, that self confidence, and very comfortable being that sort of that middle eye, rather than thinking I have to be something I'm not, and then this person, this victim that I'm not either. So it's quite interesting flipping between the two. and I think I've done that for the majority
yeah,
of my life.
yeah, yeah. And it would be like as you said, like to kind of have to flip through the two of those and never really just be yourself.
Yeah.
I guess um, was just absolutely, yeah, terrifying. I guess on one point, but then soul destroying in other ways. But I guess what you've taken from it, what you've learned from it, it's horrible to have to go through it. Obviously, um,
Mm.
but you can see it in you when I talk to you now, and when I see everything you do online, and I see all the stuff you're putting up on, about the company and about the coach and everything else. You can see you never want anyone to ever feel that way ever, and that
No,
comes across so much in everything that you do. There's a raw passion behind what you do now that's just incredible to watch. I have to say.
that's really kind, man. It is, like I said, it's because I feel like I know what the secret. I know what the
Yeah,
key is, and
yeah,
I just don't want kids to feel like you got to be resilient and you got to put up with some stuff. Don't get me wrong, but there's
yeah,
different levels of it, and
yeah.
you've got to find out about yourself. It's not all about happy, clappy. Every child's got to be happy. What we want is children to be resilient and be able to stand on their own 2 feet, and they need to be able to do
Mm-hmm.
that with this. And to do that, they need support from adults, peers, and everyone around them. They need to be on this. They need to go on this journey on their own. Um, and
Yeah,
the key for it is communication and letting people know what's going on in your head. It's just like us as men not being like feeling there's myths or um, there's certain social elements that we're not allowed to talk about being upset, about our feelings. It's just ingrained in society that men don't talk, and we need to break that. Like that, it goes through your whole life, and
yeah, yeah,
if we can, the troubles you went through and everything like that is actually all about communication, and can you talk to the loved ones around you and actually be listened to and be taken seriously and have doing something rather than feeling everything's on your own. Because I'm lucky. Well, there's some people that can't see a way out of it, and then they take the only option they
mm,
think that's left, and that breaks my heart. And I think
yeah,
that's where I can see where a lot of things are going with the world these youngsters are growing up into, especially like when I was younger, and same with you, we were like kicked out, and we were running around, and um, we were playing football, playing in the parks, mucking around with our friends all summer long, all holiday, or after
mm-hmm.
school. These kids now goes back, and they're they're the most connected but disconnected generation we've ever had, and it's making sure
Yeah, absolutely.
we need to get them reconnected in the right way.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting you say that like that. It is kind of similar in I guess in terms of men and our perception of how we talk, and if we can get people to listen to us, or should people listen to us, or will they listen to us,
Mm.
and look, I say it on every episode, and all the stuff that I post online, and that is that we're supposed to be these strong, stoic, quiet men. Just don't say it, and just take it
Just
on the chin.
yeah,
Everything's going to be fine, but and we have that perception now that we shouldn't talk, that we're not supposed to, and that nobody's going to listen to us, and everything else, and even the stuff I do with companies now. When I go in and I deliver talks on mental health to companies, and they ask, what can we do, and you can have your wellness days all week long, right? You can have your mental health months, and you can throw your marketing at it as much as you want for that week in June or that day here and there. Unless you change the culture, nothing's going to
mm.
change,
No,
right?
hundred
And the,
percent.
and the and the culture comes from leadership, right? It's as simple as that. And I can say with Plus and what you're doing, it's not just about giving these kids, I guess, a tool in which to express themselves to a certain degree, right? And it's not just about giving the teachers, I guess, an easier, not an easier, because that's the wrong word, a better insight into
Mm.
each of the children's well-beings. But by them learning this new habit, you're in turn creating that brand new culture right from the ground up, all the way through. That will, and we may not see it. It's going to be, 2, 3, 4 generations below us that are going to take this into the workforce as they get older.
This is mate. There's no quick fix to well-being. It is something that's
No.
done. It's something that's not sexy, right? It's not fluffy. It's something that's done every day. It's about looking after yourself and
Mm.
making sure you're getting sleep, getting water, being active, aware of your emotional health, because the two are so. I think a lot of people, we talk about kids' feelings and emotions, and we want them to express themselves, but we don't link the importance of the physical well-being and the mental well-being, and how
Yeah, yeah,
they're intrinsically linked, right? And actually, what we want kids to do is
absolutely.
we want kids to start to take ownership of their own journey. And
Mm.
I really want to tell kids, and seeing it from the rooftops, about how much they're in control of their own well-being. I think they don't think they are at the moment, and it's like, if you can genuinely get some of these very basic habits installed and ingrained, so it's something that you just do and you do on a regular basis, and it comes down to that consistency of being able to consistently do sort of an 80-20% job, where you're sleeping 80% of the week, you're sleeping well. You're drinking well
Yeah,
80% of the
yeah,
week. It's these kind of, it's not being perfect, but it's just making sure that that's always in the back of your mind. And that's why we get them to reflect and journal, so that we can then, and we've gamified it to to make it more fun for the kids. So it is to try and talk their language, and for them to really get behind it, because you just never know. You never know when you're going to need it, and that's what I found. I didn't know I was going to need the
yeah,
habits that I was installed with until I got to a different place that you wouldn't think happened, but it did.
yeah. And that's the thing. Like, go back to your earlier point again, and to touch on the kind of the gaming aspect of it, right? Make
Yeah.
it fun, make it interactive, make it so that they enjoy doing it.
Mm.
But then there's also a very sophisticated AI sitting in the background then for the adults in the room. So tell us a bit about that. I guess how the teachers pick it up then, and
Yeah,
take it forward.
we use it. We use a natural language AI to be able to pick up what the children are saying from their comments, and pick it up with their physical and the emotional well-being, to create almost like a 3D avatar of every pupil's well-being. And then we can let the teacher know on
Yeah,
their sort of, we've got a dynamic dashboard that takes 30 seconds for the teacher to check in, and it flags the pupils that have either asked for help, have said something that probably needs the teacher's attention. Maybe it might be safeguarding, or issues in class, or something that we're concerned about, or they've had, a week of really bad sleep. That's the kind of information that we can push up to the top and let the teacher, who's got so much, they've got so much paperwork and admin to get through. It's like all they want to do. You got something like 50,000 teachers leaving the profession every year, and all they want to do is teach. And they're having to do. They're getting pulled.
mm,
Pulled from pillar to post, and it's just giving them. It's just trying to put. I've tried to put myself in their shoes and go, well, actually, if I want to teach these kids, I've got to unlock it, and I've got to have a good bond with them. If I've got the information that's going to improve that bond, then I'm going to be able to teach them, and I'm not going to have to be trying to
yeah,
work things out. I can actually listen to my pupils telling me what's going on, and then from them we can use their expertise to actually teach them, which is what they want to do.
yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. Like, it is. It's, when you look at the background of it and the theory behind it, like, it's just an incredible tool. Like, it really is. I have to say, because having kids who've been through the UK school system, right, and you see, and I mean, to a certain degree, it's similar here. There's 28, 30 students per teacher, right? The teacher's only human. They're never going to be able to know everything about every child all of the time. Like, it's impossible,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And certainly if you're growing up and if you're in a culture where you're taught to hide it, certainly from a male perspective anyway, right? Or you think you're going to get ridiculed if you say something, or snitches get stitches, that kind of mentality, right? The teachers, you become very good at hiding that stuff. So the teacher's never going to know it's happening. But for you to be able to come out with a system like this that kind of gamifies those feelings, those emotions, that wellness thing, that almost then flags it to the teacher, says, you know what, you need to keep an eye over here for a minute, and just watch
That's
that kid
it.
there for a second.
And,
That's because that could.
sorry, yeah, it could.
Sorry.
Sorry, Matt. You could easily just catch.
Yeah.
So you want to try and catch these. You're trying to catch these kids to fall down these cracks that we spoke about earlier. But also,
Absolutely, yeah.
so you look at worst case scenario, and you're trying to stop the ones that are maybe getting abused, or they've got issues going on themselves, and they need that one-to-one help. But also, if you think about it,
Hmm.
there's something like 200 school days in the primary school year. Okay, and
Yeah,
there's other things out there, and like you touched on, wellbeing's done maybe once a week or once a month or whatever. There's not very many touch points for those kids to have these habits like ingrained into them. By having little touch points
no, no,
for 200 days a year, and done for their primary school, what's that going to build for them? Going like we will never see, we might never see those, we may never see when those habits are required and what they do. But I guarantee you, at some point they'll kick in and they'll be like, "That's why we did it." But that's very hard to quantify.
yeah.
Everyone wants validated research on well-being. They want it, they want to
Hmm.
be able to prove it. It's one of those things, and I just from being my own personal experiences is I could have had that best upbringing with my granddad and gone to a different school and not been bullied, or gone to school and not been with those kids that did it, and I might well not have ever needed those tools. You just don't know.
Yeah. Or flip it the other side, and you could have gone to that school, and you could have come from a background where your granddad wasn't in the physical shape and mental shape that he was in, and giving you those tools, but you could have seen him maybe drinking a lot. You could have seen parents drinking a lot. So therefore, you could have gone down that road and ended up on a completely other path altogether. Do you know what I mean? And it is, you quite rightly said it. I don't think it's something we can really quantify now in how that's going to look in 10 and 15 years time for these individuals who are learning these new habits, because it's never really been done before. You
Exactly.
know, you can look at all the research you want into wellness and into mental health and into, positive habits and all of that kind of stuff. But I think what you're doing is groundbreaking to a degree, because it's never been done.
Mm.
There's never been that much focus, as you say, on a daily touch point into mental and physical wellness as what you're doing with primary school kids now. So it's absolutely fantastic.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah, it's definitely it's great. It's really nice to see it come from like an idea in my head that I bumbled around in my head for sort of 6 months to actually going into schools. And we started off with like 40 kids in my local primary, and we're up to 250 kids now.
Hmm.
We'll be onboarding more schools next term. And it's great when you go into the class and you see the kids sort of jump around and they go, well, yeah, it's great. We love the gamification. It's like one of the kids said to me the other week saying, I've been using it for sort of 4 weeks now, and now I don't read my iPad when I so what we can do with it is not just then journaling. We then give personalised bite-sized information on a daily basis to areas that may have slipped, or areas that they can improve. So they're getting that constant educational piece as well.
Okay.
Do you know? So it's not just going, just rate your sleep and then you give them a sleep score. It's going, oh, we've seen your sleep's dropped off. These are the kind of things that maybe read a book before bed rather than watching your iPad, because blue light's bad.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
Blue light doesn't help with your sleep. And one of the kids put that in there, going, I now read a book before bedtime and I sleep through the night, which I haven't for ages. So you do see these fantastic little changes, but they're very hard to quantify.
Brilliant. Yeah, yeah. And we won't see the results of them for years to come, but but it's putting those foundations in to help these kids in 10, 15, 20 years, or whatever they come up against. It may not be, as severe as what you went through. It may not be bullying at all. It may be that these habits help them when they hit the workforce, or when they go through a breakup, or when they go through a bereavement of a parent or a grandparent or whatever. It's teaching them and changing that culture that you need to look after, your emotional health, your physical health, your mental health. Everything is all entwined.
Traumas, there's lots of different trauma, but actually for that
Yeah.
individual, it's very, very important and very, very real. And actually what you end up doing doesn't really matter what the trauma is. You always fall back onto those foundations that you've got. you know, whether it's a bereavement, whether it's abuse in whichever form it's going to take, or whether it's stress whether it's stress that you've suffered at the hands of your boss or something like that. It is building foundations that people fall back on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, it is. It's fantastic. As I said, look, when I seen what you were doing a few weeks ago, and I kind of looked at the story behind it. I was actually thinking it was one of your posts you put up on LinkedIn. I think that caught me eye. Um, I thought I need to have a chat with him. I need to see what this is all about, because it's pioneering, to a degree, in what it is. This kind of software, just the way you're interacting with the kids and getting them to interact with the software, but which is great. Do you know what I mean? Because it's developing habits for them, but it's I like I said before, it's that intelligent AI and software behind that's throwing up the red flags then to the adults who these kids care, or these kids who are under their care. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Where they can step in and they can be there at a point in time before it goes too far. They can recognize things and pull them aside. And yeah, it's
mate,
brilliant, buddy. It's
mate,
brilliant.
and I hugely appreciate your sort of the words of encouragement, and it's these kind of conversations that helps me, puts that bit more fuel in the tank for me to keep going, because sometimes when you're in it, it's hard to see the impact that it could potentially have. But it's all
Yeah,
about, like,
yeah,
for me, it's I had maybe a set of teachers that didn't recognise the signs or whatever, and actually the teachers hold the key to, like, our children's happiness,
yeah.
success, everything. Those schools are so important, and it breaks me what's going on with them at the moment.
Mm,
But, if we put the child at the top of the tree, and that's the person we're trying to affect, we want the best. And actually, you look at how closely the teachers are around that child and the roles they have in that life. If we can
yeah,
support
yeah,
those teachers that can support the students, then I honestly believe we're into a winner, and every child then has got a much better chance of um, achieving whatever they want to achieve. It's not You're not trying to make machines here. It's just trying to make like happy children that can go and believe they
yeah,
can go
yeah.
for the dream, or they can go and reach their full potential in whatever aspect that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you're right, like, because it does, like, the impact the teachers have. I mean, they're nearly spend, from a school day perspective, from 9 o'clock, half eight, 9 o'clock in the morning till half two, half three in the afternoon. They're with the teachers as much as they're with the parents to a certain degree. And if the kid has become really good at hiding something, whatever's going on, is that, no, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, and then you go to your whatever it is, your annual or your biannual parent teacher meeting, and
Yeah,
it's like, oh no, he's doing great, yeah, his work is fine, little bit quiet, but he's 8, he's 9, he's 10, it's whatever, he's a little bit quiet, but he gets his work done, doesn't tend to mix with the others, but that's okay, there's social aspects there. You brush it off, you're like, okay, cool, well, but you've no idea what's actually going on. Do you know? Because the kid is hiding it. The teacher can't see it, so she can or he can't talk back on it. The parents then are completely oblivious to it. And as you said, then the kid falls through the cracks. So certainly then when you go into secondary school, because that's another kettle of fish then altogether
oh,
from
it's huge.
primary school. The,
But
the hormones start changing, everything. That's just on another level then altogether. But certainly from a primary school perspective, as you say, if you can catch them at that younger age where you develop these habits, then definitely going into secondary school, it's gonna hold them in good stead.
we want to move into. We're looking at ways that we can move into that and really support children on that transition period between years 6 and 7 in particular. Like I said,
Mm.
it's a big hang up point for a lot of children. It's one of their big first stresses. Moving into that secondary school where they've been
Yeah,
top
yeah,
of the
yeah.
top of the tree for the primary, then it's bottom of the tree, and no one cares who they are. And it's
Yeah,
interesting. It's
but that's
interesting.
it.
Go on.
No, I was going to say that's it, like you say, because it is like that. Because you're in, like, so for here, so we start secondary school a year later than you guys.
Yeah,
So your year 7 is our, as we call it, sixth class, right?
yeah, I got it.
Um, but you do feel that though, like you're the top boy in the school in sixth class, and then you go into first year and you're like this size. The
Yeah,
uniform doesn't fit because your mum's bought it to match
yeah,
it to make it
yeah,
last 3 years down the line. All
yeah.
that you haven't grown into, the hormones haven't kicked in yet. You haven't put the stretch on. So you literally you go from this to this, and the anxiety and the stress and the fear that comes with that is massive. Absolute.
Huge. And just to touch back on the point you made, about that quiet like 8 9 year old that goes to a parents' evening. Before
Mm.
it was very much it's quite subjective like opinions to go. Go and ask. He seems to be all right, a bit quiet and things like that. Now with Plus and with the teachers, we can now give like almost like a wellbeing report that you'd get for a maths report in English, how they're doing in English. We can then put together like these wellbeing reports to back up the teachers to go. Look, Mr. Smith, we see that Jimmy's struggling to sleep. He said he's been struggling to sleep for the last 2 months. Is there something going on at home? How can we help Jimmy sleep? These are the reasons why sleep's important. There's actual data to back
Mm.
up the decisions rather than it being I think he's okay.
Yeah. I know what you mean. That's brilliant. And like that, as you say, yeah, it's and each one of those, it's not collective data as well, and almost like an average thing that's coming out. The data that you're collecting is on that child,
Mm,
so it's an individual custom report. It's not like the teacher's going back to the parent and saying, "Well, most of the kids are not sleeping at night, so you should try this with your son." It's like, no, your son's not sleeping at night. This is what he's telling us. This is what we recommend you do, or what should we be doing? How can we support you more? All of that kind of stuff, which is just incredible. It really is.
yeah, it's all about personalising it and make. But the great thing is, Matt,
Mm.
is we've got the tech. I haven't come up with some sort of amazing new piece of tech. I'm not a technician. The stuff's out there. This stuff's out there and has been out there for ages. It just hasn't been used necessarily in this format, in this way, in this
Yeah, yeah,
environment. I think that's what's exciting is looking at ways to. I'm excited by the fact that every pupil now doesn't have that every pupil can be personalized and we can actually track every
yeah.
individual to make sure they're okay, just like you would do,
Hmm.
just like you would as an adult have your own GP and your own health, your own identity and sort of well-being and health. We can now do this for kids.
Yeah, yeah. And you're right. Right, the software isn't brand new, or not the software. The technology isn't brand new. You're right in that sense. I remember when I lived in the UK, I worked for a tech company that specialized in IT for schools. Right, so I spent a long time working with schools and um, multi academy trusts and
Yeah,
that kind of stuff around the UK and Northern Ireland, that implementing iPads and technology, and looking at how you transform teaching and learning and pedagogy and all that kind of stuff through technology. And there was software back then that looked at how they were doing in maths and how they were doing in English and how they were doing in
yeah,
PE and sciences and all of those other subjects, right? Um, and then you could say, well, there's a drop off here. So he's after dropping down in science. Why is that? Is it because it's getting harder for him? Is it because something's happening? Is it because of people in class? Is it? You could look at bits and pieces of it, but it was only the data based around his academic performance. That's
yeah,
it. That's the only data that you got. But I think why I find it more incredible, and I thought that was groundbreaking at the time. I thought this is fantastic, this is
yeah.
brilliant. Every school should have this. It is, and it is amazing. Right? You need these tools to help,
100%.
because some kids are going to be really academic and some kids aren't going to be academic. It's as simple
Yeah,
as that. Do you know what I mean? Like some kids are not everyone is going to go on to be a scientist or an astronaut, right? Some kids are going to go off and do. They're going to be artists. They're going to be musicians. They're going to do whatever it is they want to do. But what really excites me about your software and how you've pulled that technology together is that it doesn't matter whether they go on to be a pro athlete like you were, whether they go on to be an astronaut or a scientist or a
yeah,
physicist or a musician or whatever. Their mental well being is always going to need looking after.
Mm.
And I think that's what gets me really excited about what you're doing, you know. And as you said, I don't think you give yourself enough credit, buddy, for what you've pulled together, because this will literally change lives going forward, I think.
Yeah, I do love that, and I think it's it's being able to put it. It's so important, and primary schools have got such good opportunity of putting it at the very heart of the education, very heart of the school day.
Yeah,
And do you know what?
yeah,
If I'm sending my kids to a primary school, then I'm sending my kids to a primary school that have that well-being of my children at the front and foremost.
hmm,
And if you know
yeah, absolutely,
if a head teacher walks around going, it might be plus, it might not be plus, whatever it is, going, we've got the first thing we do with our years 3, 4, 5, and 6 is we ask them about their well-being every day, and if you ever want to know what the how your kid's feeling emotionally or physically
mm,
well, then just ask me, and I can just print out a report and we can sit down and talk it through. It's data, and you know it's real time
yeah,
data, and
yeah,
it means we can start to pick up problems or issues, or seeing how well they're doing, saying actually things look really good. You're doing a good job at home, and it's actually to try and back up the parents as well.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. No, it's brilliant. It really is. Like I said, look, I seen, I don't know how it was. It came up in my feed a few weeks ago with the plus thing and what, you know, your description on it, where it came from. I think you kind of touched on a bit of your story from a bullying perspective, and then went into what you were doing
Yeah,
about plus and plus ed and stuff. And I thought I need to know more about that story. And I'm delighted, absolutely delighted, I got to sit down with you tonight, buddy, to have this conversation, and hopefully, you know, just get the word out about plus and what it's doing.
yeah.
I think I genuinely, I think it's fantastic.
Well, it's great. It's great. Honestly, it's fantastic to have you on your podcast, and it's huge. It's huge what you're trying to do, like raise awareness for men, um, and you know get people talking, particularly. That's how we've come together. You know, we've both been through some
Mm,
pretty traumatic stuff, and that's quite a leveler. And one thing I do know
yeah,
is everyone's got problems and everyone's got issues. Now, not everyone talks about them, and
yeah,
we want to. Joe, you're trying to get men to open up, to hear about different experiences. Hopefully, um, my personal experience can help some people think about opening up and talking to their loved ones or talking to friends or whatever. And then I want to talk about like-minded people that have a sense of um, almost a sense of duty to our young kids to go. Do you know what? They're really coming.
yeah,
They're really going to be coming through some tough times, and and they're already going through some tough times. And
yeah,
the figures stack it all up. It's like, come, let's be proactive.
yeah, absolutely.
Let's find a different solution to what's currently going, because what's currently going isn't working.
No, no. And I think we're kind of, you and I kind of testament to that. You know what, the way we kind of were brought up, and the tough upper lip or stiff upper lip and all of that kind of stuff. It doesn't lend itself well later on down the line. You know, it's easy to say man up. It's easy to say, you know, sugar it off and everything else, but when it gets inside your head and it's causing you sleepless nights and insomnia, and it's, you know, you say the anxiety constantly there all the time. Um, we have a duty to the generations coming up behind us to do it better and teach them a different way of dealing with it, I think. Um, so yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you put that very nicely.
Right, well listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, buddy. It really is. All I can say, look, I've said it a million times tonight, and for a risk of sounding like a broken record, Tom, genuinely, I think the software, the Plus company, is genuinely gonna change how the next few generations of kids look at mental well-being and mental health. And I know from my perspective, I always talk about men's mental health. I think women, and I say this all the time, I think women have a better understanding of mental health than men do from a societal perspective.
Mm.
Um, girls will talk about their mental health a lot more than not to say that they don't go through the same stuff,
Yeah.
and girls get bullied absolutely and all that kind of stuff. They really do. But I think, women as they get older, they confide in each other and they talk a lot more. Blokes just don't, right? We don't do it. And I think what you're doing in changing that culture with the company, I just think it's brilliant. And I wish you all the very best of luck with everything that you do going forward.
Matt, it's been, like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure being on, and I hope you're right. And I think with a lot of support and a lot of backing, I think get a few people and companies and whatever behind this. Because if we can do this and really change those prospects for those kids, I think it'd be hugely satisfying thing to be part of. But really enjoyed our chat, Matt. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, buddy. I really appreciate it. All the best.
Cheers, mate.